Leave him to me, hissed Ron in his ear. The opportunity was too perfect to miss. Harry creeped silently behind Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle, bent down and scooped a large handful of mud out of the path. "We were just discussing your friend Hagrid," Malfoy said to Ron. "Just trying to imagine what he's saying to the Committee of Disposal of Dangerous Creatures. Do you think he'll cry when they cut off the hippogriff's splat?" Malfoy's head jerked forward, and mud hit him. His silver blonde hair was suddenly dripping with muck. "What the—" Ron took a hold onto the fence to keep himself standing. He was laughing so hard. Malfoy and Crabbe and Goyle spun stupidly in the spot, staring wildly around, Malfoy trying to wipe his hair clean. "What was that? Who did that?" "Very haunted up there, isn't it?" said Ron, with an air of one commenting on the weather. Crabbe and Goyle were looking scared. Their bulging muscles were no use against ghosts. Malfoy was staring madly around in the deserted landscape. Harry sneaked alongside the path. A particularly sloppy puddle yielded some foul-smelling green sludge. Splatter! Crabbe and Goyle caught some of this time. Goyle hopped furiously on the spot, trying to rub it out of his small, dull eyes. "It came from over there," said Malfoy, wiping his face and staring at the spot some 6 feet away left of Harry. Crabbe blundered forward, his long arms outstretched like a zombie. Harry dodged around and picked up a stick, lobbed it at Crabbe's back. Harry doubled up with a silent laughter as Crabbe did the kind of pirouette in midair, trying to see who had thrown it. As Ron was the only person Crabbe could see, it was Ron who he started towards, but Harry stuck out his leg and Crabbe stumbled, and his huge, flat foot caught the hem of Harry's cloak. Harry felt the great tug, then the cloak slid off his face. For a split second, Malfoy stared at him. "Ah!" he yelled, pointing at Harry's head. Then he turned his tail around and ran, breakneck, back down to the hill, Crabbe and Goyle behind him. Harry tugged the cloak up again, but the damage was done. "Harry!" said Ron, stumbling forward and staring helplessly at the point where Harry had disappeared. "You'd better run for it. If Malfoy tells anyone, you'd better get back to the castle quick." "See you later, then," said Harry. Without another word, he tore back down to the path toward Hogsmeade. Would Malfoy believe that he had seen? Would he believe Malfoy? Nobody knew about the invisibility cloak. Nobody except Dumbledore. Harry's stomach turned over. Dumbledore would know exactly what happened if Malfoy said anything. Back at Honeydukes, back down to the cellar steps, across the stone floor, through the trapdoor, Harry pulled off the cloak, tucked it under his arm, ran flat out to the passage. Malfoy would get back first. How long would it take him to find the teacher? Panting, a sharp pain in his side, Harry didn't slow down until he reached the stone slide. He would have had to leave the cloak where it was. It was too much of a giveaway in the case Malfoy had tipped off a teacher. So he hid it in the shadowy corner where he started to climb, fast as he could, sweaty hands slipping on the sides of the chute. He reached the inside of the witch's hump, tapped it with his wand, stuck his head out through, hoisted himself, and he heard a quick footsteps approaching. It was Snape. He approached Harry with a swift walk, his black robes swooshing. "So," he said. There was a look of suppressed triumph about him. Harry tried to look innocent, all too aware that his sweaty face and muddy hands, which were quickly hid in his pockets. "Come with me, Potter," said Snape. Harry followed him downstairs, trying to wipe his hands clean on the inside of his robes without Snape noticing. They walked down the stairs, through the dungeons, and into Snape's office. Harry had been there once before, and he had been there very serious trouble there too. Sirius had acquired more than slimy, horrible things in his jaws the last time, all standing on shelves behind his desk, glinting at the firelight, adding to the threatening atmosphere. "Sir," said Snape. Harry sat. Snape, sit, said Snape. Harry sat. Snape, however, remained standing. Mr. Malfoy has just been here to see me. Strange story, Potter, he said. Harry didn't say anything. He tells me that you were up by the Shrieking Shack when he ran into Weasley, apparently alone. Still, Harry didn't speak. Mr. Malfoy states that when he was standing there talking to Weasley, when a large, enormous thing of mud hit him from the back of the head. How do you think that could have happened? Harry tried to look mildly surprised. I don't know, Professor. Snape's eyes were boring into Harry. It was exactly like trying to stare down a hippogriff. Harry tried hard not to blink. Mr. Malfoy then saw an extraordinary apparition. Can you imagine what it might have been, Potter? No, said Harry, trying to sound innocently curious. It was your head, Potter, floating in mid-air. There was a long silence. Maybe he'd better go to Madame Pomfrey, said Harry, if he's seeing things like that. What would your head have been doing in Hogsmeade, Potter? Said Snape softly. Your head is not allowed in Hogsmeade. No part of your body has permission to be in Hogsmeade. I know that, said Harry, striving to keep his face from guilt or fear. Sounds like Malfoy is having Malfoy is not having hallucinations, snarled Snape, and he bent a hand on each of Harry's chair, then face were a foot apart. If your head was in Hogsmeade, so was the rest of you. I've been up to Gryffindor Tower, said Harry, like you told. Can anyone confirm that? Harry didn't say anything. Snape's thin mouth curled into a rapid smile. So, he said, straightening up again, everyone from the Minister of Magic downward has been trying to keep famous Harry Potter from Sirius Black, but famous Harry Potter is so into himself that ordinary people worry about their safety. Famous Harry Potter goes where he wants, with no thought of the consequences. Harry stayed silent. Snape was trying to provoke him into telling him the truth. He wasn't going to do it. Snape had no proof yet. How extraordinarily like your father you are, Potter, Snape said suddenly, his eyes glinting. He, too, was exceedingly arrogant. A small amount of talent on the Quidditch field made him think he was the cut above the rest of us two. Strutting around the place with the friends and admirers, the resemblance between you two is uncanny. My dad didn't strut, said Harry, before he could stop himself, and neither do I. Your father didn't set much store by rules either, Snape said, pressing on in his vantage with his face full of malice. Rules for lesser mortals, not Quidditch Cup winners. His head was so swollen. Shut up! Harry was suddenly on his feet. Rage he had not felt since his last night at the Privet Drive was coming through him. He didn't care what Snape's face had gone rigid, his black eyes flashing dangerously. What did you say to me, Potter? I told you to shut up about my dad, Harry yelled. I know the truth, all right. He saved your life, Dumbledore told me. You wouldn't even be here if it wasn't for my dad. Snape's sallow skin had gone color of sour milk. And did the headmaster tell you that the circumstances in which your father saved my life, he whispered, or did he consider details too unpleasant for precious Potter's delicate ears? Harry bit his lip. He didn't know what happened and didn't want to admit it, but Snape seemed to have guessed the truth. I would hate for you to run away with your false idea that about your father, Potter, he said terribly, grin twisting his face. Have you been imagining some act of glorious heroism? Then let me correct you. Your saintly father and his friends played a high, amusing joke on me that would have resulted in my death if your father had not got cold feet at the last moment. There was nothing brave about what he did. He was saving his own skin as much as mine. Had their joke succeeded, he would have been expelled from Hogwarts. Snape's uneven yellowish teeth were now barred. "Turn out your pockets, Potter," he spat suddenly. Harry didn't move. There was a pounding in his ears. "Turn out your pockets, or we go straight to the headmaster. Pull them out, Potter." Cold with dread, Harry slowly pulled one of the bags of Zonker's tricks and the Marauder's map. Snape picked up the Zonko's bag. "Ron gave these to me," Harry said, praying he'd get a chance to tip Ron off before Snape saw him. "He bought them back at Hogsmeade last time." "Indeed. And you've been carrying them around with you since. How very touching. And what is this?" Snape picked up the map. Harry tried with all his might to keep his face straight. "Spare piece of parchment," he said with a shrug. Snape turned it over and his eyes on Harry. "Surely you don't need a very old piece of parchment," he said. "Why don't I just throw it away?" His hands moved towards the fire. "No," Harry said quickly. "So," said Snape, his long nostrils quivering, "is this another treasured gift from Mr. Weasley, or is it something else? A letter, perhaps, written in invisible ink, or instructions to get to Hogsmeade without passing the Dementors?" Harry blinked, and Snape's eyes gleamed. Let me see," he muttered, putting his wand smoothly off the map. "Reveal your secret," he said, touching the wand to the parchment. Nothing happened. Harry clenched his hands to stop them from shaking. "Show yourself," said Snape, tapping the map sharply. It stayed blank. Harry was taking deep, calming breaths. "Professor Snape, Master of the School commands you to yield your information you conceal," Snape said, hitting the map with his wand. As though an invisible hand were writing upon it, words appeared, smooth surface on the map. "Mr. Mooney presents compliments of Professor Snape and begs him to keep the abnormally large nose out of people's business." Snape froze. Harry stared dumbstruck at the message. But then the map didn't stop there, for more writing had appeared beneath it. "Mr. Prong, with Mr. Mooney, would like to add that Professor Snape is an ugly git." It would have been very funny if the situation hadn't been so serious. And then there was more. "And Mr. Padfoot would like to suggest that, in astonishment, that the idiot like that even became a professor." Harry closed his eyes in horror. When he opened them, the map had his last word. "Mr. Wormtail bids Professor Snape good day and advises him that to wash his hair, the slime bait." Harry waited for a full blow. "So," said Snape softly. "Well, see about this." He strode across the fire, seized the fistful of glittering powder from the jar of the fireplace, and threw it into the flames. "Lupin!" Snape called into the fire. "I want a word." Utterly bewildered, Snape stared at the fire. A large shape appeared in it, revolving very fast. Seconds later, Professor Lupin was clambering out of the fireplace, breathing ash off of the shabby robes. "You called, Service?" said Sir Lupin mildly. "I certainly did," said Snape, his face contorted with fury, strode back to his desk. "I've just asked Potter to empty his pockets, and he was carrying this." Snape pointed to a parchment on which the words of Mooney, Wormtail, and Padfoot and Prongs were all shining. An odd, closed expression appeared on Lupin's face. "Well?" said Snape. Lupin continued to stare at the map. Harry had the impression that Lupin was doing the same bit of quick thinking. "Well?" said Snape again. "This parchment is plainly full of dark magic. This is supposed to be your area of expertise, Lupin. Where do you imagine Potter got such a thing?" Lupin looked up at the merest half glass of Harry's direction, warned him not to interrupt. "Full of dark magic," he repeated mildly. "Do you really think that so, Service? It looks to me as though it's merely a piece of parchment that insults anybody who reads it. Childish. but surely not dangerous. I imagine Harry got it from the joke shop." "Indeed," said Snape. His jaw had gone rigid with anger. "You think a joke shop could supply with such a thing? You don't think it is more likely that he got it directly from the manufacturer?" Harry didn't understand what Snape was talking about, nor apparently did Lupin. "You mean by Mr. Wormtail, or one of these people?" he said. "Harry, do you know any of these men?" "No," said Harry quickly. "You see, Service," said Lupin, turning back to Snape, "it looks like a Zonko product to me." Right on cue, Ron came bursting through the office. He was completely out of breath, stopped just short of Snape's desk, clutching the stitch of his chest, and trying to speak. "I gave Harry that stuff," he choked. "He bought it at Zonker's ages ago." "Well," said Lupin, clapping his hands together and looking around cheerfully, "that seems to be clear that up, Service. I'll take this back, shall I?" He folded the map and tucked it inside his robes. "Harry, Ron, come with me. I need a word about my vampire essay. Excuse us, Service." Harry didn't dare look at Snape as they left the office. He and Ron and Lupin all walked all the way back into the entrance of the hall before quickly speaking. Harry turned to Lupin. "Professor, I don't want to hear an explanation," said Lupin shortly. He glanced around the empty entrance hall and lowered his voice. "I happen to know that this map was confiscated by Mr. Filch many years ago. Yes, and I know it's a map," he said to Harry and Ron, looking amazed. "I don't know how it fell into your possession. I am, however, astounded that you didn't hand it in, particularly after what happened last time. Students left the information about the castle lying around. I can't let you have it back, Harry." Harry had expected that, but he was too keen for the explanation of the protest. "Why does Snape think I got it from the manufacturers?" "Because," Lupin hesitated, "because the map makers would have wanted to lure you out of the school. They think it's extremely entertaining." "You knew them?" said Harry, impressed. "We've met," he said shortly. He was looking at Harry more seriously more than ever. "Don't expect me to cover you up again, Harry. I cannot make you take Sirius Black seriously. But I would have thought that you would have heard when the Dementors drew near you. You would have had more time to effect on you. Your parents gave their lives to keep you alive, Harry. A poor way to repay them, gambling their sacrifice for a bag of magic tricks." He walked away, leaving Harry feeling worse by far than he had at any point in Snape's office. Slowly, he and Ron went up the marble staircase. He paused. As Harry passed the one-eyed witch, he remembered the invisibility cloak. It was still down there, but he didn't dare go get it. "It's my fault," said Ron abruptly. "I persuaded you to go. Lupin's right. It was stupid. We shouldn't have done it." He broke off, and they reached the corridor, and the security trolls were pacing. Hermione was walking around them. One look at her face convinced Harry that she had heard what had happened. His heart plummeted. Had she told Professor McGonagall? "Come to have a good gloat," said Ron savagely as he stopped in front. "Or just been to tell on us?" "No," said Hermione, holding her letter in her hands, her lip trembling. "I just thought you ought to know. Hagrid lost his case. Buckbeak is going to be executed."